I am here to talk to Theo about serverless and JavaScript and something that I like to call service as a platform. It made me a mobile developer. It made me a Node developer, so a backend developer. It made me an e-commerce developer. It made me a VR developer, and now it's making me a serverless full stack developer.
To go back to the always bet on JavaScript, I think that's like the implied part in a lot of ways is the reason you bet on JavaScript is it's always moving. There's always something new going on. There's something improving and changing. We are live. Welcome, welcome. Good to have y'all here. Thank you guys for stopping by. We have an incredibly exciting guest this week. I would imagine y'all, if you know me, probably already know him. But if you don't mind, Sunil, want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hello, hi. My name is Sunil. I go by 3.1 on Twitter. I'm a tech lead at Cloudflare in the workers org. I've been writing JavaScript for a while. Folks might know me from my time on the React team, or when I made a CSS and JS library called Glamour, and that was a time, I guess. I've been doing this thing now I just realized today that I've been doing this thing for about 16, 17 years now. I'm getting really tired of it. And I am here to talk to Theo about serverless and JavaScript and something that I like to call service as a platform. Service as a platform. That's kind of what we're here to do today.
So excited to chat all about that. You managed to blast through like so much of my intro stuff in that short time. Like I know you've been working for 17 years. It's not the most fun thing in the world to think all the way back to how you started, but just I would love a quick like 4 sentence or less how you started coding, how you ended up with React, and how you ended up doing services, platforms, and stuff at Cloudflare.
In 4 sentences?
Yeah,
Theo.
make it as
Jeez.
short as
Okay.
possible.
I got into JavaScript because I did terribly in engineering college, and the toy language and JavaScript was considered not engineering enough for somebody to give me a shot. Those times were very different. I've worked in big companies, small companies, government, design shops. I built out Yahoo Maps. That was fun. E-commerce. There was also a bunch. Working with the government was the worst. I think don't do that. Um, I was look after working in e-commerce. I spent some time doing nothing, and then I got and I interviewed with Facebook, and they decided, hey, come show up. I spent 2 years there doing Oculus, which was writing React for VR, which was just the most fun job ever, easily. Like
Oh,
it's just.
boy.
Then I did the React team for a year. Uh, I don't think they liked me very much. Well, it was okay. It was kind of fun. Now I work in serverless. I decided I wanted to do something different, and I'm doing backend. And it's nice because it's still JavaScript. It feels that's the nice thing about JavaScript through my career. It was there when I wasn't considered a real engineer. It was there when it suddenly became serious with frameworks. It made me a mobile developer. It made me a Node developer, so a backend developer. It made me an e-commerce developer. It made me a VR developer, and now it's making me a serverless full stack developer. That's been the one constant across all of it. So that's kind of how I'm here. And I was just like we were just discussing before this. Like it seems impressive if you look at it all in one go, but really all I've really done is stuck to like one thing. Well, the easiest one. Like I just stuck with JavaScript through all these years and got all these opportunities that came my way.
What's the
So
saying?
that's been
Always bet
fun.
on JavaScript?
They say that, but I think the version I've heard is that, hey, you should be using the right tool for the right job. So if you want to do front end development, then you use JavaScript. If you want to do mobile development, the right tool is again JavaScript. If you want to do backend development, yes, the right tool is JavaScript. If you want to do game development, the right tool, it turns out, is JavaScript. So yes, always choose the right tool for the job.
Yeah, it's crazy how many jobs JavaScript seems to be the right tool for, even more so nowadays, and how the rare times we find things that it's not good enough at, we end up with solutions right around the corner. Like it wasn't that long ago that Node happened and somebody challenged the idea that JavaScript's just for browsers. And then all of a sudden we're using it for crazy IO heavy workloads because of how good the event loop is at scheduling stuff. And
Hmm.
here we are, however long later, where now you're working at like one of the most well-known platform companies for like deploying systems online, still using the language you used to hack around in the browser not that long ago.
Pretty much, it's very strange. Like I feel like I've had a charmed life where even the timing has been right for these things. Where like workers as a platform, I think happened only like 5 or 6 years ago, and that's right about the time I was like showing up in when I moved to UK for Facebook. So that that matured a little bit to a place where it's proven, and now I'm like jumping in and taking credit like for the CLI that runs it, which is quite fun. Yeah, the timing I think is like in general I've had good timing with JavaScript, which is very worrying by the way, because at the time when my e-commerce shop was moving to be becoming mobile only, um, I bought myself an Objective C book and I bought myself a Java book, and read like 5 pages. I was like, "Fuck, this is not for me. There's no way." And then I shit you not, 2 weeks later at React Conf they announced React Native, and I was like, "Hold up, wait a minute. What? So Mintra, like the company I was working at, was the first. I think it was the first React Native deploy in India. Like I think we went to production before anyone else. So the timing of this thing has always been weird. I was doing front end development in 2008, 2009, I forget the year, and I was starting to get bored. And this dude named Ryan Dahl, who had otherwise previously seen on LiveJournal doing web comics, he's like, "Yeah, I think I've figured out how to actually do JavaScript on the server." Other people had tried, right? Like there was Nashorn, Rhino, there were a number of things. And I went and I saw Ryan Dahl give a talk about it at the Palm office in the Bay Area. That's when Palm was also a contender against the iPhone. I got a free Palm pre phone at the meetup. And I was like, okay, I guess I can do this. I guess I'm a backend developer now. It's all been great. Like, I think, yeah, the JavaScript thing has persisted way longer than me or anyone else, I think, actually expected. But hey, here
Quick
we are.
shout out WebOS. It was ahead of its time in so many ways, and we're still catching up to a lot of what it did. But
Hmm.
yeah, that was an awesome rant. It touched on so many things that like I feel like I got to come into most of those same things like 5 years later when they had stabilized. Like I didn't touch Node for a while. I was deep in Java because I came from Minecraft. I moved over to Elixir when I got my job at Twitch, which was really fun, building all of the like video pipes that we were
Hmm.
doing for like custom content stuff in Elixir. Then I got moved to a Golang team, couldn't stand it, just felt like a monkey. We were moving over to React and TypeScript as a company, which is like far enough into React's journey that TypeScript's now a part that's usually associated with it. And like GraphQL was
Hmm.
starting to blow up too. And that's when I got in. And like all the roughness had been smoothed out. And my experience, like having autocorrect in my like text editor, working on JavaScript that hot reloads in the browser on a code base with 300 plus engineers working in it. Like the amount things had matured by the time I started was so cool. And watching the innovation since has been incredible.
That's just you touch on another thing, which is I thought in 2009, 2010, right after Node had come, I was like, oh man, it sucks that I wasn't 10 years younger. No, that I wasn't born 10 years, that I wasn't 10 years older, because I felt uh, that was it for JavaScript. I was like, yeah, it's done. I came to the game way too late. All the innovation has been done. All the cool frameworks have shown up. I guess Backbone for Life. They had solved debugging. I came from a IE6 alert style debugging. You're not like, that is like one painful experience I'm so glad nobody has to experience again, which is just using alerts to debug everything. And that also meant that there were particular bugs that would disappear if you did an alert, because it would change the timing of things. Like it was a fucking mess. Like it was weird. Um, but I thought all the innovation was done. I'm kind of done. And here I am roughly 10, 12 years after that, and shit does not stop. Like, so it's so, the things that are better now are not just, I think, the technology, but also resources. Back in the day, I think the biggest resource was ajaxian.com. If you wanted to have news, it was one website that we would go to multiple times a day, because Dion and Ben would be updating it multiple times a day. We would be hearing about a new jQuery widget for applying rounded corners to your divs. That was the hotness at the time. How which jQuery, which snippet of JavaScript are you using in your page to get your divs to have rounded corners? Okay, that was that was kind of painful, but it was a lot of fun. It was nice once Firebug came out. So I think that's just it. The message here is now you will enter JavaScript tutorials in Google, and once you're past the ads, you will have page after page of extremely fresh resource with different perspectives, things you can learn in different areas. Machine learning is doing JavaScript now. God damn, man. Like, uh, that's nice. It's a nice. So it's the 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 journey ahead of us is way longer than this journey we have taken so far. I think that's the thing to like remember. That's what I like
Yep.
thinking.
Uh, to go back to the always bet on JavaScript, I think that's like the implied part in a lot of ways. Is the reason you bet on JavaScript is it's always moving. There's always something new going on. There's something improving and changing.
Hmm.
Even like Ryan is in chat, the creator of Solid.js, and he like said Knockout for life because he's a huge Knockout fan. But it's crazy to see like an idea like Knockout that you might have bet on at the wrong time is coming back strong with Solid. Like a lot of the patterns from there that were powerful and were lost in time to just blow out the whole DOM. Who cares? That like even the pendulum is progress. And if you've convinced yourself there's no progress, there's just back and forth. That's still something to hang out and watch. Like you can learn so much from it and level up so much during it. Like I think that is still cool.
So I refuse to use the pendulum analogy anymore because there's no visual uh, um, component to it. The analogy I like using is hero's journey, which is your every movie thing, which is like you start off being knockout and cool kid on the block, everyone hates you, you go through change, and then you come back as solid JS, where you have the lessons of the past behind you. So JavaScript basically goes through cycles of the hero's journey, is what I think right now. That's what I
That
like.
makes a ton of sense. I love that framing. One other framing I want to try with you because it's just like a thing we touched on. It feels like you've pushed JavaScript in the things it's actually best at in a lot of ways. Like you might not think that JavaScript on the server and JavaScript like as a platform is the best use case for JavaScript. I would argue it is a great use case for it, but what I'd argue even further is the interfaces for those things absolutely are. And one of the interesting things I've seen with Wrangler too is like not only are you using JavaScript to build the interface for Cloudflare, you're using React too. And I'd love to hear a bit about how like you think about building user interfaces and how that has changed but hasn't at the same time for you.
So when we start, so for context, for the folks who are listening, Wrangler is the command line interface, the CLI tool, your terminal tool for building and developing Cloudflare workers. So you can run a little development server. It does compilation for you. You use it like to spin up dev tools, and you can finally publish to the Cloudflare workers platform. It takes care of like um, login and auth and uh, this way converting what looks like a regular JavaScript project into a couple of proprietary thing that when I say proprietary, I mean just custom ways that Cloudflare does it, etc. So this was originally written in Rust, and it's got a legacy of about 2 years behind it, and it's a good tool. But and you'd think that wow, like if Cloudflare was into Rust 2 years ago, while everyone else is doing like Rust stuff for their system tools right now, why would you rewrite a Rust tool to TypeScript while everyone else is doing the opposite, right? And it turns out that Rust is good at some things, right? So CPU heavy stuff, things that need very strong things where data is being converted from many different like data transforms so that you get the types right and you don't mess up stuff like that. So like CPU heavy this thing stuff. What it's not good at is network heavy stuff, uh, and uh, more than the runtime characteristics of it, it's actually kind of hard to develop on. So doing a build takes a bunch of time, running tests on it takes time. um, you need to because Rust generates binaries, you now have to make binaries for every available target platform. And for a company like Cloudflare, whose developers are on all types of OS and CPU architectures, you now have to make builds for all of that. Which is why when M1 laptops came out, it was a months. I think I want to say it was a couple of months before Wrangler would work on this. Compared to Node.js, which works on every freaking combination now, from what I understand, and this is what James Snell was telling me, anytime you push a PR for Node.js, there's a bunch of unit tests that are running in a garage full of Raspberry Pis of one of the core contributors in Australia, because that's where the Raspberry Pi, he set up a Raspberry Pi cluster like this. It's just across these things, and we should be totally be using that. So it turned out it was actually hard to iterate on as well for that. What makes it worse is for the compilation story of Wrangler, it would use Webpack, which was written in JavaScript. So the stuff that you would need something that was particularly CPU intense for was in JavaScript. So the architecture is completely wrong. It's like Rust on top and uh,
JavaScript on
JavaScript at the
bottom.
bottom. What you want is JavaScript on top, which is great for the network stuff, non-blocking, all that jazz, and replace it with something strong internally, which is why Wrangler actually ships with ESBuild. All the compiling stuff is with ESBuild, which is just the gold standard for compilation stuff. In fact, we don't mention ESBuild anywhere in our docs. We made a choice early on where we're like, no, people have to believe that there's a module system and all commands happen instantly. And ESBuild is never the problem here. And Evan Wallace is kind enough to generate binaries for all the architectures that we need to do. So it's not our problem. Um, so that's why we did the rewrite in JavaScript. So that was the first reason. Then a big portion of Wrangler is the developer experience. So the way that Wrangler and the workers developer experience happens, at least the default experience, is that it doesn't even run on your machine. It takes the script and it puts it on the edge and spins up a special dev session on the edge. So anytime I write Wrangler dev on my laptop, apparently our data center is near Heathrow. I'm in London, by the way, for those who don't know. So it's near Heathrow. So it's actually running there, but because the workers platform is so fast, I think the latency is like 9 milliseconds for me, by the way, like here. So it feels like it's local, but it's truly running in a production environment with access to the resources that you would have in production otherwise. So your environment variables, connections to your caches and key value stores, and soon the database D1, etc. So for all that stuff, JavaScript is pretty great, but it's also a combination of a number of long running processes. So one thing that's running ESBuild, one thing that's uh, running the connection to the actual remote server, etc. And there's some, and each of these things interact in ways. So, for example, anytime I make a change in a file, it has to save it, do a compilation, do a fresh upload to that server, come back down. If the connection breaks, it needs to try to do it all again. And you know what is a great technology for stitching together long running processes that depend on different data sources? Motherfucking React. So there's a library called Ink. It's by this guy named Vadim, who's in Ukraine right now, by the way. Dude, like he just had a session yesterday where he and other developers were talking about a war-life balance. They were literally discussing, as developers in Ukraine, how can they avoid missiles falling on them and still get work done.
Quick tangent on that. I have been so blown away to learn not just like how many developers are in the Ukraine, but how many things I depend on every day are based out of the Ukraine. One of our like main data platforms, Data Unlocker, is based out of the Ukraine. PMPM is made by a person out of the
PNPM is
Ukraine.
from
Like
Ukraine as
there,
well. Yeah, exactly.
there's so many pieces like the Electron Veep bundler I was using to use all the tech we're talking about to bundle Electron apps was made by somebody out of Ukraine. He's actually archived the repo until the Ukrainian war is done because he doesn't want to like be focused on that. He wants to be focused on his home country. It's I learned so much about where the code I'm using comes from because of that conflict. It's been
Right.
I've learned a lot.
Um, it's man, it's kind of fucking depresses me. I'm so surprised that it's June and this nonsense is still going on.
Yeah.
Um, I have been very disappointed in a lot of governments and a lot of people who claim to otherwise it's very surprising to me that this is still going on. And you know what? Okay, fine. I don't want to get into political commentary. I'm not very
We don't have to go too
sophisticated
deep
about this.
in, but
And
just everybody
yeah, yeah.
listening know our hearts are with Ukraine. It sucks how things are going, and we offer all of the support we have to offer to them, and nothing but understanding for the effects it has on especially those developers. And like realistically, nobody should have expectations of open source developers, but especially right now, considering what they're going through, like,
Especially,
yeah, be nice to the
yeah.
PnPM maintainers, be nice to all these people.
These are our peers and like our colleagues and people we otherwise stand shoulder to shoulder with. Anyway. Okay, so Ink.js. Ink is a React renderer for the terminal, built from scratch. It's just amazing, by the way. The code base, everything. You can tell that it's a labor of love. No one has paid Vadim to do this. This is very much a I need to get this working. Okay, but for Wranglers, it's just perfect. There's literally a component that's called remote. There's a hook called use es build. There's a remote mode and a local mode. So we also have a simulator called MiniFlare, which can simulate the entire Cloudflare environment on your local laptop. And this is useful for running tests, hacking on on an airplane, or if you don't want to have to, because it's on your laptop, some things are faster, as you can imagine, because esbuild does the thing, like it loads locally. There's no network hop either, and sometimes that's nice to do, especially if you don't want to have to set up a project or push it. Anyway, reasons. So there's a remote mode and a local mode, and hitting a hotkey, because we have hotkeys in the terminal where you can hit L and it toggles between local mode on and off. Oh, that's the other thing, which is we also have inputs while we run a CLI. I don't understand why more people don't do this. Like, it's a UI, you should be able to do things in a CLI. So you can hit B and it opens up a browser window. You hit L, it toggles between local mode. Another feature we're building on is sharing. So you hit S and it generates a URL that's also copied to your clipboard, which is basically ngrok or local tunnel that lets you share your whatever you're running on your laptop with anyone else across the world, which is just super convenient where you're working on the same thing together. We have turned that off right now because we want to polish the experience a little bit. Anyway, so that's why we use React. And I mean, first of all, it's JavaScript, but it also now you're using React, and we can use all the other libraries that we want to. Um, of course, we're using React error boundary because that works out of the box with this. What other libraries are we using for React? I wonder. I'd have to actually look at the.
Got any
What is
React
my? I
query or
mean, of
just
course,
stand in there?
I do want to use React query. We are on React 17, and I was wondering whether I should help Vadim do the update Ink to 18, but I figured he wouldn't have the time to review PR, so I'm like, it's cool. That's not critical right now. Um, of course, we write our tests with just very bog standard.
Not Vitest?
Not yet. And the reason for
Jacob.
that is because I know. No, Jacob actually brought this up, by the way, that we need to move to Vitest, and I think we want to do it. A couple of things that were hard at the time that we were exploring. I think module mocking wasn't all the way there, which, no matter what your opinions on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it turned out it was very useful for us while we were while we were building this. We use Undici for requests now because why not? Just regular fetch. Um, a couple of libraries by Sindre. We use Open for opening up the browser tab, etc. Path to regexp. Just, yeah, this package.json looks like a regular as browser
React app.
thing.
That's so cool. Like,
Uh,
yeah.
so so we use React for that, and we also use React in a couple of other places. So, for example, render a table. There's a component that just takes an array and like spits out a table for you. So we just use that as well, again with Ink. And it's been a pretty great development experience, I think.
What really sticks out for me
As
here is it feels like you're building a proper like user interface and experience on top. Normally what I associate with a CLI is a very minimal mirroring of a fifth of the essential workflows that a service has, where I can like run some sketchy command and either get an error I don't understand or a way to upload a zip to them and then have it fail there instead. And that's like, but to me, a CLI is like a way to build things and a way to throw a bunch of errors, not a user experience. Expo was the first time I really felt that flip where they like built in experience into their CLI. And it feels like
The-
it almost lines up with like the other planned topic, the like service as a platform stuff. I think that your philosophy here is really interesting where you're much more focused on building an experience on top of the existing innovative infrastructure rather than just mirroring the infrastructure in the terminal.
So I think a big part of this drive isn't very much oh, it has to be beautiful and like human and stuff. No, no. I this is a conversation I keep having with Steve Ruiz, who is another person you should have on your on your channel. By the way, this is Steve Ruiz who does TL Draw. Love him. What a great guy. Um, and we both talk about the work he does for TL Draw is he gives a exact shit about how the arrows for TL Draw look and how they feel when they turn and what the balance is. And the reason for that is when it's a tool that you're using for hours during a day, every small detail is suddenly amplified because it's multiplied by hundreds of times that you interact with it, which means now every single like I wouldn't want to say microsecond, but every event, every small interaction that you have suddenly has to be like well thought out. Because if it's something that's done often enough, and in this case, like hundreds of times, like you are going to be hitting save on your script hundreds of times a day in Wrangler. So what that means, and because we have the network hop, one of the small interactions that I put like a bunch of days into getting this right, which is every time you save, you should be able to go to the browser and hit refresh immediately. In the previous version of Wrangler, if you did that, sometimes it would still load the older version of the script because it hadn't finished the update here. But now, if you do it, we actually like start because we know that you've just saved your script. We start buffering requests like immediately, so you can go and hit refresh, but the requests start getting piped through only after the server reset has happened. So for you, you don't really notice. It's like just it's 200 milliseconds, half a second, something like that. But the user interaction of save, go back to the browser, hit refresh is something that every developer will do. And when 3 out of 5 of those would otherwise fail and load the older version of the script, where you suddenly get the value of wait, did I do something wrong? Oh no, I just need to hit refresh again. So there are hundreds of these decisions throughout Wrangler, and me and the team, like I'm quite proud that we kind of have this philosophy the way that we're thinking about it. Every time we think about would a developer interact with this, another thing, and this was a I'm not joking when I said this is one of the reasons I even joined Cloudflare so that I could fix it, which is when you initialize a project with Wrangler, you have to make a configuration file. Well, you used to have to, like, you would make a configuration file in toml, which at some point we're going to move away to JSON. It was built by Rust developers, which is why it's in toml. um, but in that you would have to give the name of the script, what type it was, your account id, a zone id, which is a thing that you associate with like a domain. uh, you might have had to set up a custom build and something like anywhere between like 5 to 12 fields before you could get to writing a single line of code. The name is nonsense. You can just generate XYZ if you want in the beginning. Your account ID, you should be able to get automatically from your token. You just make an API call and say, hey, does this person have an account ID? If you have multiple account IDs, we do a little drop down now, by the way. We have ES build. I can compile that thing faster than like you can blink your eyes. So I should be able to figure out what exports are there, infer what format your thing is in, etc., etc. Which means that as soon as the rewrite launched, and demoing this was so good internally, you now don't need a configuration file to get started. That is not what a person wants to do when they want to start writing code. They're absolutely disinterested in writing a configuration file. They want to literally write npm install some package and start hacking on it. And that is the thing that we want to do. So uh, thank you for noticing that we care about developing a user experience around it, because that's been like a huge part of it, which is for something that we expect people to use for hours on end every day, how do we make this stupid thing pleasant enough? And the user number zero here has usually been me, because I have a very low opinion otherwise of myself. Like I need to be able to look at the work that I've done with Wrangler and be like, would I use it? Would I, in a moment of anger, use this and be happy with it? Um, One of the things I like telling people is zero config is like old hat. What I really want is zero developer experience. I don't think developers want to experience anything at all. They're not fucking interested in how shiny your buttons are. Might be nice if it is. Really, what they have is a job to do, and they would like to spend all their time only on the things that they're supposed to do for their job and then go home. Everything as much as possible, if you can get out of the way for that, that's the thing that sort of like are the those are the kinds of tools that I like using. So sorry, that was a bit of a
No,
brain dump, but yeah, we give a
that's the
shit.
exact rant I was hoping to trigger. I couldn't agree more. As great as things like Rust and Golang and like the cool CLIs and things people build with them are, those are tools for building infrastructure, not interactions. And JavaScript is the tool of choice for building interactive experiences. And it makes a lot of sense that a JavaScript expert from like decades of time in the industry is coming in, and when he takes over the interface for interacting with Cloudflare, that he makes the interactive experience better. I am just surprised that this is not a common thing yet. That said, though, I think this is where we pivot into service as a platform. What is a service to you, and is that encompassing of what we're talking about here? Is it like I think like when I think of service, I think of customer service and experience and all of those other things that
Mhm.
come with it. Like, what do you mean by service when you say service as a platform, and how does this fit in?
So I was thinking today what I would answer for this question, and I think I have a good I think I have a good answer. Okay, so the difference between a service and a platform is exactly the same difference as between a library and a framework. Hear me out, okay? I'll explain myself. Uh, there's something in computing science which is called computer science, whatever. It's not really science, whatever. Uh,
Software.
this idea of it's called the Hollywood principle. Have ever heard this?
I have not.
So the Hollywood principle is very much a you go and ask people for a job in Hollywood, and they say, "Don't call us, we'll call you." So a framework is something that follows the Hollywood principle, where you set up your components and whatever, and the framework decides how to call the things that are to be called. A library, otherwise, is very much a call us when you need us. So helper functions, pure function, whatever. Like libraries are very underscore JS.
Mhm.
Some people would say the same thing for React.render, which is why this is not an exact definition. But with libraries, what you can do is you can take many different libraries and arrange them in sort of order, and then not even in order. Like you'll call one library, get something, call another library, get something. So services are very similar to that. So, for example, the Twitter as a service, there is an API to it, and it says here are all the API endpoints that you can call. It's a service for you to call to post a tweet, to get a list of tweets, to delete a tweet, get the number of likes on a tweet, etc. As you need the data, like you can call it. Um, Vercel is a platform. You provide it your code and some configuration, and it runs it for you. So that I think is sort of the difference between like a service and a platform. It's exactly the same as like a library versus a framework. So uh, where I'm going with service as a platform, I try to explain it with an example. Take Discord, right? Discord is a tool where you can do chats and services and etc. But everybody likes extending Discord with bots. So you want to write a bot that listens to events from Discord and responds to it. Like so, you anytime some particular person comes up, you want to push a message which says, "Hi, welcome to the chat room. Say hi," or some stuff. "Hello to everyone," etc. And obviously there's a lot more complicated than that, but Discord themselves don't let you upload code that runs as bots. And the reason for that is because they don't want to get into the business of being a platform, of running your code and scaling it and making sure that there's no privacy leaks. It's such a big headache, right? Which is why if you want to write a Discord bot, you now need to run it on your own server, on your own infrastructure, on a Vercel, let's say. Um, and the way I like thinking about this going back to the library versus platform thing is Library functions can sometimes take callbacks, where you will pass it a function which says, uh, well, underscore JS will have a dot map function that not just takes an array, but also a function to run on each element of the array. Like it can take code to do this. Uh, but you don't see, you don't really see dot map as a service because none of these services would accept a callback from you. They will do things. You take something like an OAuth service. Is that called Auth Zero? Is that the multi-billion dollar one?
I
That's the
think
one,
that's
right?
the big one,
Auth
yeah.
Zero,
Auth0 is the
right?
company, OAuth is the standard.
Auth Zero. So Auth Zero as a company, that's the one I'm thinking of, like as the service. They will provide you authentication as a service, authorization as their auth as a service. But A, you need to start providing them money for more expensive features. And B, if they don't have a feature, you're kind of fucked, right? Like if they don't provide a particular feature. If only they would accept a function that you like imagine if an auth service, let's say I open up PyAuth, I start a company called PyAuth, and the way that I implement it is that you upload a function that takes in some details of a user and returns true or false. That's it. That's the whole service. You can design your own UI, etc., etc. But when somebody clicks the login button, it will call the function that you uploaded to me. This is now infinitely more programmable than any other auth service because now I as a service can run your code. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about service as a platform. If Discord could simply take your code and run it anytime you say you configure it to run on any of your events, where you write a function which will be given an event and you get to run side effects and potentially some state, you have access to a database that you can use. This is the inversion of control that services can now start providing. Very few people do it. Shopify, does Shopify do it? I know Shopify lets you define templates, but
They
do you have
with
to run
Hydrogen,
your
they're
own
definitely like
servers?
going in this direction, I would say.
They are. That's exactly the direction they're going in, and which is why they're deploying Oxygen, which is their platform.
Mm-hmm.
They're setting up data centers and trying to go on the edge. That's what Oxygen is, and it's for running the code that you upload to them. Um, I'm trying to think who else kind of does this already right now. Um, Facebook would let you host iframes, but you would still have to do your own servers. Figma lets you upload uh, widgets, but that runs only in the browser. Anyway, but you know which company is really good at letting you upload a bunch of tiny functions and running it immediately in a safe space and scaling it across the world?
You mean other than
Fucking
Cloudflare?
Cloudflare. No, I mean Cloudflare. Cloudflare is the one. And at Cloudflare, they're calling it workers for platforms. And Kenton, the guy who made workers, he calls it, I fucking hate this name. It's called function as a service as a service. So it's a service that you can use to do functions as a service. It's just ridiculous name. I call it service as a platform. I like my name. You can now provide, yeah, you just hook into Cloudflare workers, you sign the sales, sign the contract. Maybe not, maybe you can do it. I don't know if we are providing it yet. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but you can now provide this to your users. So maybe with a browser-based editor, okay? They don't even have to use a CLI. You should be able to go into the account and say, type in your stupid function here. You can use NPM modules and TypeScript. And you can now upload that to Cloudflare workers. And anytime an event comes, they'll just route it back to this and potentially then like go back through. So this is the equivalent of passing a callback to your service. You can give them code to run. Uh, Another great use case that I thought of, which is very different from this evented thing, is you know what MDX is, right? I'm sure you know what MDX is,
Yes, big fan
the
of MDX
format,
here. For those that don't know, MDX lets you write JSX and HTML inside of your Markdown.
right? And like JavaScript, like you can write code that runs. So you have with MDX, you're kind of you end up having to check it into your code repo. And the reason for that is you need to compile it and you can run it only like on your servers. But the moment you're using a service like Sanity or Contentful, you're kind of hosed, right? Like you can maybe store the MDX there, but once you get it, you now have to eval it. Like somewhere you need to run eval. You can't really compile it all at once or anything. Wouldn't it be nice if not only you could save MDX in these databases, But when you made a request to it, they ran the code for you and returned you the HTML or the response object that you need to spit back. And you can tell it like that. Maybe you can just use npm modules, or you can say this is the only import map of modules that you can use in your blog posts or whatever. But the way Sanity would do this is exactly the same thing, right? Like if you save it as MDX, the next time you make a request, it sends the script to Cloudflare, executes it, gets the response, sends it back, and potentially does like calls or whatever. Every time you see it, it has a hit counter in it that increases by one. Sure, why not? So this, I think, is a novel architecture. Like I don't think a lot of it's not commoditized yet. I don't think a lot of people like just provide it. Um, B, it's good computer science, which is that's why I keep leaning on the library uh, metaphor, which is that no, it's literally just you're using a function, but the function can also take functions as input. And I think it scales well. You do not have to be a multi-billion-dollar company to design your service today like this. You can get a free account on Cloudflare Workers today and use Wrangler to make a project and start designing this. While we figure out how to roll out workers for platforms for everybody, for every customer. And that's why I'm excited about it. I don't see after a point why you wouldn't build a service that lets users do what they want, right? And you can bill them separately for it. Like you can take Cloudflare's costs that will come to you in an API and add it onto the bill of the users, where you're like, yeah, okay, this is your CPU time that you spent on these things for this month. And Cloudflare is really cheap. It'll be like pennies at the most. So that's the pitch. Do you get
I
what
get it.
I'm
I'm
saying?
gonna challenge you with a new potential framing. If you don't think this works at all, feel free to shut it down hard. But I love trying to visualize these things. It's just like fun
Hit
for me.
me. Let's hear it.
So the way I think of platforms is vertical, and the way I think of services is horizontal. A service is the
Hmm.
line you draw in a bunch of platforms, usually. So, like, Discord has a bunch of platforms behind it that power the chat, power the things we're doing. There's functions they're running whenever a message is sent, and all those things. And they cut a line in it, and here's the service. This is where users engage with the platform. What it feels like you're
Sure.
describing is a service, or service as a platform is the ability for a user to go down the vertical through the service almost.
That's right. Exactly. Like you suddenly get to a privilege layer behind the curtain, so to
Yes.
speak. Like you can see the magicians from the back of the screen. You can see all the tricks that he's hiding, the
Yeah.
cards he's hiding behind his back. Yes, I love it. Yes, you get to slice through the layer.
Yeah.
That's good.
The
I don't
platform,
own the
the
analogies for
platforms
this.
are the things that the service are built on. Service as a platform is access to those pillars that the service is built on.
Bang on. And uh, with the fractal nature of it, which is that you do not have to become a platform provider yourself to provide this to your own users. And that's like
Mm-hmm.
suddenly where you're like, oh shit, okay, that's new. I can do this. Like you can make a startup now and design with this from day one, which I think is it's kind of cool. I like
Yeah.
it.
And we're seeing more and more
It's nice.
stuff like that. There are definitely like companies that were ahead on this, but when I look at like Supabase and their functions, I think that's a great example of this too, where you can have code that runs on data change without having a server running checking every data change or waiting for those to happen. The ability to write code that runs when a thing happens. I saw Jacob just mention like Ping. I think Ping's very similar too. We're a service that is a video call app. You join a call just like anything else, but we give you access to the vertical of each individual video feed that you can now consume separately how you choose your way for your needs and use case. We're not prescribing a solution so much as providing a service that lets you integrate your solution vertically within it.
And this is not to say that it's a silver bullet, right? Like there's now clearly trade-offs in this. The biggest trade-off is, are you going to expect your users to learn how to code? And not everyone will want to do that. But A, clearly, like you can still provide everything that a service has always provided. This is now in addition to it. It's not a either or situation. But also now, much like npm just rocked the JavaScript scene, well, not, I think it'll probably be npm itself that does this, which is now that you can choose your favorite packages to upload and run on your behalf, which is what happens in the Discord bot scene, right? You're like, here's a Discord bot, take it, deploy it on your server, run it, make whatever modifications you want to it. And this is not like it'll open up a new marketplace. It'll be the code that we are already familiar with, just like using React in the terminal. You will be able to use all your favorite packages to build these things inside your service, including the things that you already use for your company. The auth thing I really like, because the thing that you do is, well, we use this Microsoft Active Directory, plus we have regulatory changes. Like if you're a bank or whatever, like someone comes up to you and says, hey, we want to use your stuff, except we have all this custom shit we have built for the last 20 years. I'm like, can you express it as a JavaScript function? Awesome. I'm not going to spend the number of sales deals that startups otherwise lose because they don't have the right integrations on day one. That conversation suddenly starts changing, because you're like, yeah, I'll just write you a function just for you for this one customer. It's fine. I don't have to do any major changes to my backend to accommodate this one customer. And I think that's where like all the ideas are in my head right now, where I'm like, oh shit, what are the new things that this suddenly enables, especially for people who are building, for builders. Like it feels like it's a great tool for builders.
This is actually one of like the hot topics I put in the questions. So this is your first bit of, I want to say pushback, but like challenging this idea. My concern would be a company like Cloudflare. This makes a ton of sense for, because you're building for builders, as you said. Like the people you're creating
Sure.
for are just like yourselves. They're additional developers that need
Hmm.
to use these things to develop. But a lot of developers aren't building for developers, they're building for users. And my concern would be like a lot of the benefits we're describing here, like better control and integration with an auth service like Auth0. How much better is that than me owning auth through NextAuth, for example, which is an open source package I can install into my Next.js repo? It has
Hmm.
plugins for every major database provider, including Prisma, so I can hook directly into my own Prisma, own my own OAuth auth story, and hook in whatever functions I want, and even patch package it to make fundamental changes to that package. I have full ownership, can provide this for much cheaper, and rather than using another service and hoping that their vertical platform underneath does what we need, we have full ownership in our space and the ability to switch between providers. I've actually moved our auth away from AWS on Postgres over to PlanetScale with MySQL, with Prisma as the layer between. And because of those abstractions, I was able to do that effectively for free. And I'm curious how much you think this philosophy applies to developers building for users versus developers building for builders.
So first of all, it's effectively free only if your time is worth nothing, which is the reason for any technology decision, right? Which is, do you right now you have the time to build these things, and it's kind of like your bread and butter. But for people a who it's who's it's not their specialty, so people who are not deep in the programming world and who want to just use a service off the shelf, it is way easier for them to. And I want to think of a good example. Well, maybe the Sanity plus MDX example, this magical Sanity that supports MDX. The problem here is not just that you get to own the stack, but now there's a maintenance cost to it. And that maintenance cost would be better spent by Sanity, not even by Sanity, but by the VCs who are pumping money into Sanity at the moment. And that's pretty much it. What you're asking is, does it boil down to a buy versus build decision? And that's actually separate from the service as a platform thing. Like I said, right? Like as a service, you can still provide the user friendly no code experience. Can I just start calling all services now no code and say we want low code services? um, and that will always be an option, and you will always still have an option of hacking it together by yourself, uh, which you don't really lose. But this is a novel addition to the options that you have, and I think that's the kind of the way to look at it, which is, of course it won't be for every use case. And I mean, come on, like I refuse. I think Next.js is great. I think Remix is great, but I'm the masochist type who's like, well, I'm going to build a thing from scratch for my thing, which is why I don't really update my blog anymore. Because every time I do it, I'm like, well, I'm going to spend a half hour seeing what the new React 18 APIs are, and 3 days later, I'm like, yeah, okay, I haven't done anything.
It's actually why I
when
picked
really what
Astro
I
for my blog. It's the only thing that's like simple and straightforward enough that I will play with anything, and it is the easiest way for me to build HTML, but using modern tools.
how dare you use Astro when you should be generating artisanal handcrafted HTML by hand? How dare you? And you use garbage collection in your language? Come on, man. Like, that's
I'll work
just
on it.
amateur art.
Sorry, Primeagen.
But you
I'll
see, but so I think the picture isn't uh, use the service as a platform architecture or services that provide you platform like abilities. It's very much a, hey, there are times when this is going to be a good choice in addition to everything else you've had so far, and that's the idea, that it's novel. It's not, I'm not even saying it's better than X, Y, and Z options.
yes.
I'm saying this is a new W option. I should have said, yeah.
I
Whatever, but you get it. Like, this is now a new type of architecture that I'm excited about it right now. And because it seems exciting, but also because it's new, which means I don't have all the answers. You don't have to hold me to it. I'm like, I don't
No.
know. Like, I'm
And
just
to be clear to everybody
playing this
listening,
game.
like this is all us like theory shit posting right now. None of this is like
Theory.
like strongly asserting here's how the world works and here's how the future is going to be. This is us for fun theorizing about different framings of platforms, products, deployments, and all the stuff that we do every day. But this is an exploration via conversation, not us asserting this is how the world works.
I mean, even more, like, just to nail that home, nobody does this yet. Kind of. I mean, nobody does this. The only people who can afford to do this are the people at scale. While the thing we are saying is, yeah, like nobody can do, like any hacker can do this on a weekend right now. I don't think the official APIs by Cloudflare are released just yet. Like, you can sort of design it that way, but the whole thing for, because not only you want to make sure that the code that you upload doesn't run with the same privileges as the home account, which has always been part of the problem. You don't actually want to run the code with the same privileges. So yes, we are theory shit posting here at the moment, is what we're doing.
Very much within our usual stuff here. I love me my theoretical
Mhm.
bullshit. It's where I live. I am gonna try reframing this because I definitely don't want it to be like, is this better than X? More, I want to understand what this mindset is like competing with or an alternative to, if that makes sense. So, do you
Mhm.
see service as a platform as a like mindset more in competition with AWS or more in competition with Next.js? Because I think both of those paths are like paths you pick now to an extent. And what I see here is like an in between from the two in a really interesting way. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So I think it's hard to answer that question because uh, I think this is more of an architecture decision. Another
Is
example I was
Next.js an
talking
architecture
about.
decision then? Let's ask that question first.
Uh, do you mean Vercel? Like, do you mean
No,
like
I mean,
AWS
when
versus
you
Vercel?
pick Next.js, there is some level of architecture inherent to that decision. Like there's a few paths from there, but like when you pick Next.js, you've picked, I have to deploy this one of these handful of ways, either in a serverless
Sure.
environment through Vercel or other options to deploy Lambdas, through a server full environment that's like proper instances like fly.io or AWS, or generate like static assets. But by picking like Next.js, you're now limiting your specific options. I yeah. What are your thoughts on
I
like
think
is Next.js or I think Remix might be a better example because you only have the option to deploy edge functions or a server with that effectively. Like you've decided that your web app now has infra. Is that an infrastructure decision or an architecture decision?
in terms of whether, while you're building a service, whether you should use a service as a platform architecture, is that like the question?
More like if I when I pick Remix, have I made a decision about architecture?
Yeah, well, the remix is kind of light. Like, it's actually pretty flex. Well, wait, okay, hold on. Well, I think the thing that remix really nails you into is that you sort of have to have a server, right? Kind of. Well, do they have a full client side story yet? I don't think remix runs inside a service worker just yet. That's what they would need to be able to be client side rendered. Um, I think I'm struggling to understand the question in terms of how it relates with
Well,
the service
it's like
architecture.
it's more like when I, as a developer, am making decisions, when in my decision making process do I think about these things? Like, I find most developers, they're asking themselves, how do I start this app? And the question is, do I start this with Next or Remix or Astro? When does the question of do I use Cloudflare's service as a platform get asked during my developer journey? And
Okay,
when
okay,
I'm
cool.
asking that, what am I asking it in alternative to? Like, am I picking between services platform or AWS or Vercel? Or when I pick my framework, am I making that decision? Like, at what point do I think about this?
Okay, so the use case here is that you're designing software to probably be consumed by other software, so like a service. And the way you can do that is in a number of ways, right? Like, and let's just talk about compute here, because the moment you put any form of persistence, it makes it like a lot harder to design, because it's very, when it's only compute, one of the very one of the most common ways of designing it is as a package that you can take and run by yourself. So this is JavaScript bundles, but also Python modules or so on. If it's just something that is a number of functions that will do something for you, even if it is something to do with persistence, it'll try to give you a good interface that you could run by yourself, or we will take the headache of it for you. So this is Django, where, hey, take it, make sure that you've plugged in your database so and so, make sure that you've entered these configuration files, take it, or pay us $6 a month and we will host the Django thing for you and make sure that we apply security updates, etc. So in the case of the person who's designing Django itself, uh, some things become clear, right? Because you have to make those trade-offs clear with, oh, you're running it by yourself versus you're running it on my hardware. And there are trade-offs there as well, which is, okay, if we are running it on our hardware, you can't really upload any custom code by yourself. This is WordPress local install versus WordPress.org. You can't use templates on WordPress.org, if I remember right. And that's because they want to be able to update it by themselves, etc. You can't change the code. So the new form of service as a platform with the Django example is, okay, fine, we'll run it on our servers, but you can upload some code. You can run some code in conjunction with this. We are still taking the headache of the ops headache away from you. And the trade-offs now lie somewhere in between you running it by yourself versus it running on somebody else's machines and you never being able to customize it or add any extra stuff. So that is the novel part of it, I think, which is like you've always been able to take some code, run it by yourself on your own machine, or have somebody else run it for you as a service. And the delta between those things have been wide, and there is now a new option that shows up in the middle. Does that
Interesting.
help as an
Yeah.
answer?
So it's like, it's actually something I talk about a lot when like developers make decisions. Like, when you make a decision, are you making this decision for right now to solve the problem, for medium term to solve it for a while, or long term for a business that's going to scale? And like, when I think of data, for example, you might start on Heroku. That solves the problem right now. You have a database that works. Then
Mm-hmm.
you realize you're hitting connection limits. You need to scale it. You can do that on Heroku, but you're boned. So you move to AWS for that. Then you realize that every few months you have to scale up your database again and again. So then you moved either to building a fancy cluster yourself in AWS, or you give up and go to planet scale like I did. The
Hmm.
decision, I could have made the planet scale decision all the way back at the beginning and bought myself that like runway almost long term. Like, I make an early decision for a long term. And it feels like, in that sense, service as a platform lets you not have to make long-term decisions as early and keep on iterating and delivering and building for your users without making the compromise you normally have to make to do that without building your own infrastructure.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I think so. Just as a side note, there's a phrase that I learned from. Do you follow Hillelogram on Twitter?
I
Follow
do not.
Hillelogram. Great Twitter account. Um, so he was talking about how there's in software design there's this idea of request perturbations, and the meaning of that is if uh, Yagni, which is the you ain't gonna need it software principle, was an absolute, then that means that you should never use a relational database in the beginning at all. Because on day one, you barely have any relations between your data. Like you could just hard code it all into one big JSON blob. But the problem with that is that you know that you're going to need it, even if it's in the future. But making the change from a big JSON file to a relational database is going to be a refactor that destroys your company. So what you want to do is pick Postgres right in the beginning.
Yes.
And that's the idea of like a request perturbation, right? Which is something that seems like it's a very small thing where you just need to associate one piece of data with the other. But the delta from changing to what you have to what you want that to happen is just so massive. This happens, I think, with like video game features also occasionally. So uh, well, just software requests. Hey, can you filter in e-commerce? Can you filter the clothes and can you sort the clothes from cheapest to most expensive? That's pretty easy. That's one database query. Okay, now could you also sort it by what someone would like the most versus what they would like the least? That's a 6 year project where you have to get PhDs and figure out how to do personalization and tracking and this and that.
That's the
But they both
XKCD
sound
bird
so.
comic, right? The one with the like.
That's the one. That's exactly it. They sound so similar, but without the kind of experience where you're like, okay, yeah, if we are going to need this in the future, we might as well start preparing for it like right now. And in that sense, picking tools that are otherwise programmable gives you a little bit of an edge, because you know that that will give you slightly more runway than something that's not programmable, and where you might not trust the team behind that service to build the features fast enough, or build the features that are important for you to, either today or soon.
Interesting.
And it'll be some absurd thing like, um, my religion, I want to build a company where, because I'm building a company that's built on my religious beliefs, and my religion, which is about, I call it biology, by the way, I guess Sunil biology, says that you should do no work between the hours of 3 to 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. Like the database should be shut down from 3 to 5 p.m. for whatever reason. No service is going to build that feature for you, because they're like, we're not going to do this for one customer, and we're not going to spend engineering hours on it. If only they provided you a callback for when to start and shut down the server. That's more useful. That's something every user can customize. The trade off, of course, is that as a service, you now have to support this callback, much like as a library, you have to support the interface of your function until you do the next breaking change in the next major. So the analogy like sort of carries on through, where you're like, yes, this is the right abstraction, and we will support it for as long as we can.
I
That's what I like.
I really like this framing, the way that you've put it, as like being able to work around decisions that your dependencies might make that could otherwise cause problems. I think way too much about this. We meme here about the ship of Theseus. The way I build is like every piece is as
TOCS.
replaceable as possible. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's a long running pun at this point. Even like at Ping,
Mm-hmm.
I've replaced pretty much everything other than React and TypeScript at some point. I moved us from styled
Mm-hmm.
components to Tailwind. I moved us from Vite to Next.js. I moved us from, I forgot what I was deploying on originally. Probably was playing around with Render or Fly over to Vercel. Moved us from Worker KV to Heroku for 2 hours before moving to AWS, before moving to PlanetScale. Like every piece has been screwed with a handful of times at this point. The reason for this is I try to pick technologies that can be interfaced with and replaced when they're not fulfilling our needs. And the way I do that
Mm-hmm.
is by picking technologies that have like inputs and outputs that are standards rather than proprietary things. Like I would never bet on a Fauna DB that has its own like strongly opinionated query language and data store and platform that they provide, because now if they do something I don't like, I have to deal with that. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
something like PlanetScale, their MySQL, if they start making decisions I don't like, I MySQL dump, drop it somewhere else, and I'm still running MySQL. Like that portability through standards is something that I am very, very strong on for largely the same reasons you're describing this different like way of approaching things. It's really interesting.
Just and a side note on that, what I really admire about a company like Planet Scale that says we will provide a standards based product that someone can do a MySQL dump on is a brilliant forcing function for them to make the rest of the product great, instead of having to spend all their engineering inventing yet another standard, right? Where they're like, well, let's do MySQL, but let's hire a great designer. Let's hire half the GitHub Actions team. Let's make sure that we have the best rollback system on the planet. And that's such like I like how like that decision translates into the same thing with Superbase. I think that team and some of the team had tried other startups before, which were like unique things, and they're like, you know what? Let's just do Postgres that people can just use and make a great UI for it, because that has been a constant. And suddenly everybody fucking loves it, and they're like, okay, I guess we have a hit on our hands, and it's just Postgres. That's amazing, and they can add stuff on it. They're like, okay, let's do Postgres, but with functions. Now they can upload your JavaScript to that. Isn't that also powered by Deno? I think that's
Yep,
powered by
it's entirely Deno
Deno as
based.
well.
Yep.
Yeah,
They also
yeah,
had
yeah,
like
yeah. So
real time on top of DB. Like a thing updates, but you want it to update on client, just hook into the Supabase SDK, and now your client updates when your database changes. Like a whole like tier of problem has been resolved there. Don't get me started on real time
I
providers. I'm pissed off right now.
uh, I've been following your tweets. I see that you're annoyed with this. By the way, do you see like Firebase does it? I think it has Firebase functions, but for the longest time they invented a whole new language just to do auth, didn't they? Or something, security rules. And that everybody is fucking hated. I see the look on your face, so I think I just touched a nerve
Yeah.
there. So that would have been nice if it was a JavaScript function, wouldn't that returned true or false, right?
Google's obsession with not invented here is horrifying. I don't want to go on another Flutter rant, but yeah, it's so hilarious how unwilling they are to use things that aren't invented there, especially if they're good. If the thing's okay, Google will use it, but if it's good, they will refuse and compete with that at all fucking costs until they burn themselves out in the process and make something
Hmm.
laughable as a result.
It's yeah. I like speaking to not just ex Googlers, but even existing Googlers, current Googlers about this. And it's so funny to see the rationalizations. Or some people are just honest about it. They're like, yeah, we know.
Some
We
of the
get
most anti
it.
like Flutter people in particular that I've met are like on the Flutter team or work with them, which has been a relief. Like they get it. Some people there do care and understand like the plague that they are building on. But
That's good. That's good.
yeah, I
Um,
think this is a fantastic place to wrap up. I know it's really late out there in the UK. Any last things we didn't get to touch on that you wanted to dig into?
Not really. I'm very. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful. Like I've been wanting to like sort of talk about this, and this has been like really fun, where I can just shout at my laptop for a little while. I
That's why
do
we
enjoy
stream.
doing that. And that it helped me like clarify some thoughts. I get now I get to steal the things you said and take credit for it myself, which is just so good for me. uh, and I get to take it back. And talking about the service as a platform thing for the last hour has made me, at least I now believe that I'm not chasing smoke here. Like there is something here. And as you can imagine, the way that this will, we are now doing the theory shit posting, which will now be followed by the prototyping. I like calling it angry science. Like
Yeah.
I'm just going to get angry at my laptop until I get this shit to work. So I'm curious now what the software model looks like. Like how does this actually look like in practice? What does ping with a programmable platform like look like? And when I say look like, I mean literally like at the code level. How do you write this code that lets someone upload something there, and how do you wire it up? How do you make sure that it's efficient? Like that shit has to be in the realm of milliseconds, really. That's the other thing about service as a platform, because it's
One
running in
more
isolates. And
idea I want to touch on here. Platform
hmm,
specific code versus platform agnostic code. I feel like what you're describing here is playing into platform specific code. Like you're building code specifically for a way a
currently.
platform works. Whereas what we're
Hmm.
seeing right now in other places like Remix is platform agnostic code where they're building a thing that deploys anywhere.
uh, so what are the standards for interfacing with platforms, really, I guess is the question. I guess that's the meta question, which is What is the common language that people can write for functions that you can display that, and I think I know the answer already, which is that you can use while writing a Discord bot and a Shopify shop and a Ping bot, and it's probably web standards. It's a function that takes a request and returns a response. I think that's the first starting point that you would probably do. It'll probably be
You
an
sure it's
async
not
function.
Rust?
It's probably not fucking Rust, bro. It's probably not. Well,
Maybe Dart then.
nah, no. It could probably TypeScript. If you're looking for types, it's probably
Yes.
TypeScript. Um, Maybe it still runs some WASM. I don't know. But if there's anything that the last, oh, this is nice how this now ties back to the start of what we started talking with. If there's anything I've learned in the last 15, 16 years, it's that it'll be JavaScript. It's that the moment people start hacking on it, there will be an explosion, which is usually what happens in the JavaScript world. Like everybody tries every permutation of every idea. It'll probably be powered by NPM. People will deploy that shit over there. It will be an idea, I think, that's bigger than Cloudflare. I think Cloudflare just has a little bit of an early mover, I want to say advantage. But the fact that they're probably going to be the first people who start providing it. But I suspect Deno will do something like that. I'm pretty sure Fly.io, what a great crew. They will figure out some version of this that you can use. Definitely the Fastly folks. Somebody will hack it together and put it. I don't know, AWS, do they have a good, I don't think they have a good zero
Amplify.
startup. I don't know. Maybe they have
It's
some
rough.
smart
It's
people,
it's.
but
I know it's rough.
yeah. But point being, I think this is an idea that's bigger than Cloudflare.
Mhm.
It's just it feels like it's a software pattern. It's not a workers pattern. It's not a. It's definitely not a Cloudflare pattern. But Cloudflare is in a place where we are coming up with the ideas and we're in a good place to execute on it today. But things change, man. Like I think, and to everyone else who's seeing this, hello. If you've been in JavaScript world for a while, that hopefully that means I've bumped into you at some point. So it's nice. Nice seeing you, but not really seeing you. If you're new to JavaScript world, yo, the same feelings I had 10, 12 years ago. It seems like everything, like the where sometimes it feels like there's so much to learn, and b, that all the cool things have been thought out, and I shit you not, every 5 years you're just going to feel this way until you die. It's such a great place to be in. Like, we're all over the place. So have a good time. And yeah, thanks for having me. I had such a good time. I'm very grateful. I enjoyed this session a lot.
Just judging from
That's what I
chat,
got.
this seems like one of the best shows we've done. Everybody's super, super hyped on it. Thank you again so
Where
much
is
for
this
taking the
chat?
time.
I've not.
What?
Where do I see this chat?
Oh, I
Oh,
don't
is it
have.
on
So that's the
Twitch?
Twitch chat. I actually
Oh,
specifically
okay.
don't send it to people unless they ask, because paying attention to 100+ people spamming you
Yeah, I
while
don't
also
like that.
having a
I can't do that.
conversation is really hard. I don't want to put that on people that don't do it every day. I
Thank
even have
you.
people commenting like
Especially
they were
Twitch has
surprised I could
like
hold a convo while talking shit in chat.
no, that's oh, but yeah, I'm not offended, but that's just that Twitch has like animations and sounds and stuff, and I can't deal with that when I'm like
Yep.
in the zone. But I'll go and review it once this is up. But anyway, hi to everyone. It was just nice to do this again after a while.
Thank you again so much for stopping by. This was awesome. I'm gonna be right back, y'all. Switch into the BRB. Gonna like sync real quick, and we'll be back in 5 or so minutes. Thank you guys again. See y'all
Bye,
in the next
everyone.
one. Let's switch over.